76 votes. That's all the Liberals won Davenport by in the last federal election.
Oh wow, that's thin.
No kidding.
Yeah.
It was the thinnest in Ontario in the last federal election of all the ridings. What do you think when you hear 76 votes separated the top two candidates?
I'm not a strategic voter. I always vote NDP. With how close that is, like if any time I was ever thinking about being a strategic voter and voting Liberal, like I think that would sway me.
So your first reaction was, wow. So
yeah, I mean, I think like this tends to be, in my experience, a very Liberal or NDP riding. It's probably going to flip between one of the two of those. I rarely around here would see a Conservative sign.
Canadian population, they're going to struggle. They're going to be polarized. They're going to divide it, right, between two parties.
Usually the results of the last election can be a good indication of whether a race is going to be close or not.
But polling is done on about face, especially in the last few weeks. The NDP, once expected to be a challenger in several Toronto ridings like this one, now not looking so likely.
The New Democrats have fallen so much in the polls that it seems unlikely they will be able to win any new seats. For them, I think it's all about protecting what they already hold, and they don't hold any seats in Toronto. So it is more about some of those battles between the Conservatives and the Liberals. And as the Liberal numbers go up, more ridings start to get knocked off in terms of their competitiveness, I think. So I think the ones that maybe are going to be of the greatest focus will be whether the Liberals can win back at Toronto St. Paul's. I think is going to be a major one.
Last June, the Conservatives won Toronto St. Paul's in a high-stakes by-election. Prior to that, the Liberals had won all Toronto ridings in the past 3 general elections.
I think that a good majority of individuals have lost faith in the Liberal Party itself, be it that they lost faith in the one candidate that represented the Liberal Party and then by adjacent the Liberal Party as a whole. And I think that they are upset at certain elements that happened in the last few years or didn't happen, that it's almost of anybody but the Liberals, and they find that they're jumping on the Conservative vote because at the end of the day, they believe that there's only 2 parties that could actually win the majority seats.
I would have to go with the Conservatives. I know that this community sure has been fairly liberal and mixed as well, and I think that the swing is because of external factors, right? We're taking with a lot of consideration what's happening with tariffs and who can make the best relations with the US.
Whether it's going to be a tight race, sometimes is what the reports say, but tell you the truth, who knows when someone calls you on the phone to ask you who you're voting for, you can really say anything. So I'm not too sure sometimes whether the polls are really right. Do people really say the truth?
Right.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Where a lot of the vote was motivated by this anti-Trudeau sentiment. Trudeau's no longer there. A lot of those voters might go back to the fold. So Toronto St. Paul's could end up still being close. We've seen some indication that the Conservative vote in Toronto is still higher than it was in the last election. But whether or not they're going to be able to have the same dynamics and the same concentration of resources that they had in Toronto St. Paul's, that's another question. York Centre was a relatively close one last time, and I think that is the kind of riding that the Conservatives could win this time. And I think Eglinton Lawrence would also be one of the ones to watch.
Is it pretty safe to assume that when a riding is tight or presumed to be tight, that the engagement and the voter turnout in that riding is also quite high?
Most of the time you see when races are more competitive that people are more likely to go out to vote. I think they do sense that their vote will matter more. It's not always a given.
Not always a given, no kidding. Get this, in the last election, King Vaughan was the second tightest riding in Ontario with just over 1,000 votes separating the top 2 candidates, but it was also the lowest voter turnout in the province.
I think that's a really keen insight and a reminder that voting does matter, and that in those tight election places, like we can't always predict where there's going to be tight elections, but I think it's an opportunity also for both our political parties and our local organizations to do more targeted outreach, to knock on more doors in those areas, and to change their messaging, right? I mean, clearly they need to learn how to both offer up positive solutions, but also to engage people between elections and listen better so that people feel like their voice is actually being heard.
If you don't vote, you have no right to say you were not happy who came in.
I think Sometimes people are stuck in their ways. It really comes down to the lesser of two or three evils.
I think that sometimes in a metropolis like Toronto, we forget to create community within our small little, I would say, sections of the city. So we all have our own perception of how our neighbors are going to vote, or what our neighbors believe and stand for. But at the end of the day, a lot of the time we just don't have conversations with our neighbors. We make assumptions, and assumptions never work out the way that you assume.